Good morning and welcome to this, the 11th meeting of the Equalities and Human Rights Committee of 2016. Can I make the usual request that your mobile phones are switched on to airplane mode or on silent? Moving swiftly into Agenda Item 1 this morning. Agenda Item 1 is our draft budget scrutiny, and the focus of today's evidence is to hear from University Equalities Services and Admission Services about the issues faced by disabled people and people who use British Sign Language as their language for attending Scottish universities. We will have BSL interpretation, so just the usual caveats about, and this is for me mostly, not to speak too fast, to allow them to sign properly. Can I welcome our panel this morning? And we have Dr. Jane Bamforth, who's from the Conservatoire. She's a Conservatoire Counsellor and Disability Advisor from the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland. Carol Baverstock, who is the Head of Admissions at the University of Aberdeen. Sheila Williams, the Director of Student Disability Services at the University of Edinburgh. Anne Duncan, who's the Disability Services Manager at the University of Strathclyde. And Kirsty Knox, who is the Assistant Head Recruitment, Admissions and Participation Services at the University of West Scotland. Welcome all this morning to committee. We're really grateful for your attendance at committee this morning and grateful for any written submissions that you've given us thus far. We're going to kick straight into questions because we want to hear from you and hear some of your ideas that you have. We've had a huge amount of written evidence from people who have either accessed to services as students or have been members of staff. So we've got a real varied view of how people feel. We've got some submissions that are very positive and some that are maybe not so positive. So sort of looking at that and where the challenges arise, I wonder if the first opening question could be for you to give me a bit of insight into where you think some of the challenges are and what actions that your organisations have taken. Now, I know we have the chairs of the admissions and disability services, so general questions about the whole service we may direct to you, but we're also interested in your institutions as well. So, I mean, I'm happy just for whoever to go first and give me some ideas of where they think the challenges are and what actions they're taking to address those challenges. Oh, Sheila.
Thank you. Speaking for the University of Edinburgh, you'll be aware that we're one of the largest and oldest universities in Scotland. So there are very specific challenges around our physical estate, the fact that we've got almost 300 buildings, some of which are listed, some of which are very old. And we do recognise that as an institution, and we are putting a lot of resource into the estate over the next year and beyond, including bringing in a company to audit all of our buildings and provide guides for access but also egress for buildings, because there are some issues around if there's a fire evacuation drill. Excuse me, I've got the cold, so bear with me. I'll try not to splutter too much. There are also, I mean, I think for Edinburgh and throughout the sector, one of the issues is around the whole kind of mainstreaming and inclusion agenda. And it's certainly something that we've looked at via our accessible and inclusive learning policy, which we introduced over 3 years ago. And the intention behind that has been to mainstream support, which was previously only recommended for disabled students, but now should be in place for all students. And I say should be because it's still a work in progress. We still have a lot of work to do within our own institution to convince colleagues to put that support in place. And I would be lying if I said it wasn't a constant challenge to get adjustments that certainly the University of Edinburgh Student Disability Service recommends for individual students, that we need to get these put in place out in the schools. As I said, it's a very, very large institution. We've got 22 separate schools with different practices and different approaches, so we need to look at that. And the university actually is currently has a major disability review ongoing, which will report in February next year, which is looking at all of these issues. I would also say that in addition to the challenges, at least at Edinburgh, they have recognised that the challenges exist, and the spend on the Student Disability Service has actually doubled over the last 5 to 6 years. So that's been a real positive, that the institution has recognised that the numbers of students are growing, the numbers of complex issues around student support have grown, and the finance has been there to back up that growth.
Has that proven itself through more students coming to Edinburgh and less students dropping out because of challenges with a disability? Have you got those?
We've certainly seen more and more students. We have almost 3,500 students at the latest count for last academic year who disclosed a disability. And that's both the sheer numbers and the proportion of the student cohort have just increased year on year on year. So it's not just that there are more students coming to the university, but the proportion of disabled students has grown, as I say, year on year, and shows no signs of slowing up, which is good. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Some of the other institutions, if you... Jane?
Yeah, well, in contrast to Sheila, we're a very small institution with barely 1,000 students, but as I put in my submission, we have about 28% of the student population have disclosed a disability or a medical condition or specific learning difficulty. We have a very high percentage of students with dyslexia and specific learning difficulties, so about 15% of students with dyslexia and dyspraxia. The numbers have grown hugely. Since I started in post in 1998, there were about 10 students who disclosed a disability, and last year there were 293. So the Conservatoire has worked very hard at becoming more accessible and to be seen to be accessible for applicants and students with disabilities. I think our challenges are that we're dealing with some very traditional, if I can say, art forms, music, opera, and so a bit like Sheila said, sometimes the challenge is making sure that all staff, including perhaps the one-to-one teaching staff, are on board, are taking on the adjustments that need to be made. So whether you're teaching your student the violin or you're rehearsing them in an opera, adjustments need to be made. And sometimes, just because of the perhaps traditional nature of those art forms, the idea of adjustments doesn't always come easily.
Sheila. Sorry, I was just going to go round the table and allow everyone to have their say. Anne.
Yeah, at the University of Strathclyde, some of our issues do reflect the issues that Sheila has communicated in relation to Edinburgh. We have a very, very large campus on one of what's professed to be the steepest hills in Glasgow. So we have huge challenges in relation to the physical estate. That has been addressed through estate redevelopment. All our new buildings, we're making sure they're as accessible as is humanly possible. So there is the challenges of the physical estate. I think we're also experiencing growing numbers. Since I've been at Strathclyde 6 years ago, in the past 6 years, we have gone from 1,200 students to over 1,600 students with disabilities. What we're also finding is the categories of disabilities are changing. There's been an increase in mental health disclosure, which reflects, I know it's reflective of the sector as a whole. And we've also had a significant increase in the number of students presenting with autistic spectrum disorders. Obviously, both of these are wholly and entirely positive. And we see it, it's great that people and students are choosing to disclose, and, it suggests that there is less stigma associated with mental health disclosure. However, what we are finding is some of these conditions are probably conditions that staff across the university feel less equipped to support. It's not for our academic colleagues. It's not often seen as easy to support some of these students because of the nature of their conditions. Conditions can be fluctuating, they can be intermittent. You could perhaps have a plan to support them, and then a student experiences a bad episode of mental health and the plan goes completely out of the window and we need to start from scratch again. So that can be a particular challenge, and I feel that staff in central support services are this is their bread and butter. They're quite comfortable and confident in, supporting these students. But obviously students spend the majority of their time in their academic department. So it's really trying to work with a very large academic community to try and equip them really to feel proficient or to feel sufficiently confident in their support of these students. I definitely feel that in our experience at Strathclyde there is a willingness without a doubt, and staff definitely feel that they want to support these students to succeed, but sometimes they feel that they are more ill-equipped to support some of these categories of disabilities when it's not perceived as straightforward a student case.
Yeah. Is there training available for those staff? Because a key theme that's emerged through the evidence that we've had is some students feeling they would be much more confident in the lecture room or in classes when for instance, we have evidence from a student that uses BSL as a language who felt their university experience would have been much better if the lecturer had had some BSL or deaf awareness training. Yeah. So the same with mental health, the same with other disability training. What's available for staff?
Yeah, there is within our institution we have disability awareness training, and there is mental health awareness training as well. Uptake varies, and how we would address it, particularly for BSL users or students who are deaf, is if we have a student who is deaf, we will work with the academic department that they will be in to work with that group of academic staff to know, to have a level of deaf awareness. That's how it's approached within the institution. But I assume that my colleagues across the table would, there's definitely scope for doing a lot more.
Yeah, you said take-ups, varied.
Varied, yes.
Is there any moves as far as CPD for academic staff to make some of this training mandatory for their academic, their year-on-year CPD?
Sorry, Anne, can I say that the University of Edinburgh is very conscious of the support that academic colleagues require with regard to mental health. So we've instituted, in conjunction with one of the senior academics who's driven the project, a fortnightly Wednesday afternoon training session for each school within the university for personal tutors and student support officers, who are the kind of key admin people in many of the schools. However, I also recognise what Anne's highlighted about engagement and attendance. Certainly there has been at Edinburgh a bit of discussion about making that training mandatory. It currently is not mandatory, but I think I speak for many of my student services colleagues who would agree that we would like it to be so.
Yeah, I'm going to open out to questions. Jeremy.
Good morning, and thank you all very much for coming along. I've got maybe just 3 or 4 questions, if that's okay. I'll keep them brief. The first one is picking up that final point by you, Sheila, is, I have no doubt that at Edinburgh University and at the other universities across Scotland, that what you're saying is right at the top. The principal, the Chancellor, the Court, all agree with everything that you have said. But if you dig down to a lecturer in a particular school, it's just not getting there. And there's something missing, I think, between your department and, if I can say, the average lecturer at any university. And how do we bridge that gap? Because it's all very well having policies and bits of paper, but if it's making no difference to the average student's experience, then frankly, you know, we're wasting our time. And so how do you see we can bridge the gap between what you want to do and how we do it?
That's a very good question, and it's one that we've constantly grappled with, and we continue to do so. We are looking via the disability review that I mentioned earlier at that very issue, and I think we recognise that key to the process is further engagement between the Student Disability Service and each of the academic schools. I think there are issues around governance and maybe a higher profile for some of the issues that Student Disability Services are concerned with and the support of disabled students. I think there can be perhaps a situation arises where many academic colleagues, or some academic colleagues, I shouldn't generalise, see a disabled student as the primary responsibility of the disability service. Whereas we're very much about saying, no, these students are the University of Edinburgh students, we all have a responsibility here and we all need to do what we need to do, whether it's in the legislative context or whether it's just good practice or the right thing to do. So I think what we'll be looking at specifically will be ways of further engaging with our individual schools, probably starting from next year, actually. We do, I mean, I don't want to suggest that we don't engage with schools, we do, but we recognise that that has to happen in a much more meaningful way.
Second question, and this is aimed at whoever wants to jump in and take it. We got a very helpful breakdown of, if you like, listing of the different types of disability that might come to the university. And clearly the highest number of people, I think, across every institution is those that would have dyslexia or ADH, and I think that's very good. And I think probably universities are by and large pretty well set up for that type of condition. I suppose my question is, how do you deal with the more complex ones? So I asked this question last week, is there a hierarchy of disability? So if I've got dyslexia, well, we can cope with that. But if I've got a multiple disability, physical disability, whatever, well, they're more difficult to deal with. So in your experience amongst the schools of your universities, is there a hierarchy of disability? And you were nodding one way or the other.
I'll jump in with that in terms of, and yeah, you're absolutely right. I think dyslexia and specific learning difficulties is definitely the category of disabilities that most institutions are best equipped to deal with. In terms of how we respond to students with more complex disabilities, our approach is very much it's trying to get in there as early as possible. So I'll give you an example from a case I worked on a few years ago, which illustrates our approach very well. We were involved in an open day at Strathclyde's open day a couple of years ago, and we were met with an applicant who had multiple, he was quadriplegic, significant complex difficulties. He would need personal care support, would need a complete package of support. So our approach was that open day was probably September, October for application or entry the following year. So from that point onwards, we engaged with that student to ascertain as early as possible what support that student may require. Now the approach, it was a supportive approach. It was in no way to deter or discourage the student or influence the prospect of the student being offered a place. The student was offered a place. He chose to go elsewhere. But the early intervention was key, because for that support package, the student we needed to look at adapt and accommodation. We needed to look at whether his social work package would be transferred. Because we're in Glasgow, the student was Edinburgh based. There was engagement with the academic department right from the start, because the student was applying for, it was a chemistry course. It was quite a practical course, and the student had no use of his upper limbs. And we worked very well with the department. The department and the student were very forthcoming in terms of suggestions to how to mitigate the impact that this condition would have on his participation on the course. He was central to all of this. The academic department were very, very supportive in terms of thinking of different ways of adapting their teaching to make it wholly and entirely accessible for that student. We were fully confident that the student, in terms of his support, it was workable, and the student felt quite reassured that if he did choose to come to Strathclyde, that he would have had the necessary support in place. So illustrating that is, my point here is that it's the early intervention. We are lucky in terms of we have very, very good systems where we start looking at our applicant data very, very early on, like it's March, April for the September intake, and we do prioritise based on complexity of difficulty. So if you have a mobility impairment, a hearing impairment or a visual impairment, we will be contacting the students as part of the course by April, May time for entry in August, September.
Can I be devil's advocate for a moment, Anne, and say, if 10 people had turned up with that condition, could you have coped? Or because it was one, that was fine? I think it's a very fair question. I'm not trying to accuse you of not, but I think, what is the level that you can cope with?
Yeah, I would agree that if 10 applicants came with that level of complexity, like that was, students with that kind of support package, we wouldn't be presented with one every year. But if we were to be met with that in the multiples of 10, we would really, really struggle.
Okay. Yeah, I think so. Just two very quick questions, and I will be quiet, I promise. Can I ask about coursework and when people are actually at the university? Because obviously people have different disabilities, and how they cope with coursework exams will vary. Are your colleagues open to changing how students are assessed, or is it very much, this is how we've always done it, we do an exam at the end of the year and that's it? Or is there an openness to saying this person's got a disability, he or she is very capable, but they may not just be able to cope with that type of assessment?
Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry. Can I jump in?
Because this will be quite interesting as far as the different types of assessments that you would do as compared to maybe the other ones.
Yes, so we offer a wide range of adjustments to assessments. We meet with every student who's disclosed a disability for what we call a learning agreement at the start of the student's course. And the meetings between myself, the student, and the head of department or programme leader, and we go through the assessments and the coursework elements of that student's course and look at any adjustments that would be required. So we are, I think it's fair to say, we are very flexible. We don't insist on written assignments. Students can present an audio submission or a video submission if that's easier. Students can specify if there's a particular time of day that suits them better for a performance, which is very helpful for students with mental health conditions or medical conditions. And if a student is struggling, we can provide a bespoke assessment calendar, so we can push assessments sort of out of the set assessment diets for students. And so, yeah, I think we are flexible and open to looking at other ways. If a student, for example, from the performing point of view, we have accepted recordings. If a student finds it too nerve-wracking or mentally not possible to perform in the hall, then we will accept a recording as a performance assessment. We are always open to flexible assessments, I would say. Yes, at the University of Edinburgh there are a number of imaginative and flexible approaches which have been implemented in the past. I suppose because we operate in a more traditional academic sphere, there are different courses. There's a variety and perhaps an inconsistency of approach, and it may depend on the subject area, it may depend on how things have been done for the last 30 years, for instance. But yes, we can, on occasion, our academic colleagues will set an essay instead of an exam in some subject areas, and slightly different from Jane because it's a different context, but we will look at different ways of doing things. But it's also true to say that I think we are still fairly wedded to exams, and a number of students will get things like extra time or be able to sit their exams in a smaller room or a room on their own. So we'll be as supportive as we can, and sometimes certain supports are easier to recommend and be put in place than others.
I suppose just my final question is in regard to, I mean, I think it's all very positive what you're hearing. There will be some students who simply won't be able to presumably accommodate. When I was at Edinburgh, which was, I appreciate, back in the dark ages, the school I was at was just, if you were in a wheelchair, it just wasn't able to get in by a wheelchair. When you assess someone and you find you cannot meet their needs, where do you signpost them on to? Or how would you deal with an individual who, for whatever reason, because of their disability, you simply couldn't accommodate them? What support do you give them, and what signposting?
To be honest, that's never occurred in my time there, or not to my knowledge within the disability service. And that's not to deny that there are challenges, particularly for wheelchair users. I mean, I suppose referring back to your earlier point about hierarchy of disability, I don't think there's a hierarchy, but I think some of the issues that we deal with on a societal level are actually mirrored in higher education, and some of them are perhaps more complex because of the subject nature of the issues that are being taught. But to get back to the physical access issue, what we will do is, if a building isn't accessible, we'll recommend that the classes are held in a different building. So that can be quite a significant disruption on occasion for certain classes. Or we can look at broadcasting remotely. So there's a whole range of things that we would look at. I'd hate to think that we would be turning somebody away on that basis, whilst also recognising that Edinburgh's physical estate is less than ideal.
Carol, with your admissions hat on and your general overview of admissions across, being the chair, that's right. Yes. Is that something from an admissions point of view where, Jeremy's issue that he's raised here around access?
Yes. Certainly, I mean, obviously, I can speak with some experience with regard to the University of Aberdeen. And like Edinburgh, we do have an estate that's been around for 600 years plus. But we also have a lot of facilities that are very modern and accessible. And we do have areas of the but But that tends to house the academics and the support staff. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's where laboratory work takes place, or lectures or seminars. So like Edinburgh, we would be looking to ensure that we can have give the student an alternative experience, and we would ensure that their physical locality for their seminars and tutorials would be in buildings that are accessible. And in fact, most of our main spaces for teaching students and delivering lectures and tutorials and that kind of thing are in accessible buildings. Where we've encountered in the past, we've had, for example, some students with mobility issues who are looking for particular courses that might involve a field trip, for example. And that has presented in the past, and therefore students are obviously coming in and they're studying a degree programme, of which courses make up that degree on a year-by-year basis. And those courses, some of them are compulsory, and some of them the student self-selects. So we are looking to ensure that if a student, whether it's compulsory or self-selecting, to do something like a field course, and there's physical restrictions, then there would be an alternative experience. So the university would expect that that alternative experience would be worked through, and that would be through our disability advisors, working with the relevant school within the university, working with the student themselves, and looking how that alternative experience can be achieved, because at the end of the day we're looking to ensure that they can have the experience so that the necessary outcomes for that course are achieved. And there are numerous ways of achieving the outcome. From an application perspective, just touching Jeremy, on one of your comments, your questions earlier, I think one of the challenges that probably presents to all institutions is very much a keenness that applicants at the application stage feel comfortable and able to declare their disability. And for students who are presenting perhaps with complex disabilities or multiple disabilities, there's a general understanding that they are normally presented in the application process. So we are encouraging early disclosure because we are looking to work with the applicant at an early stage to ensure that we can make the required adjustments and give support as appropriate and engage with the applicant and their wider family as appropriate. But we do find that some disabilities, and obviously dyslexia was mentioned as being one that universities are fairly adept at being able to accommodate, are not being disclosed at the application stage, and they are being realised when the student arrives and registers at the university. Now, obviously, the universities work to ensure that the appropriate adjustments are made, but perhaps the applicant has not had the best experience that they might have had in the lead up to university entry, because we've not been able to give them the support that we could have given.
One clear element from the evidence we took last week was about the UCAS system being much more responsive for this. I'm going to bring in Alex.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to see us today. I've got two questions. The first of which really stems from your comments just now, Carol, and it's great to have you here because Aberdeen is my alma mater, and I was president of the SRC just at the turn of the millennium, actually, a long time ago now, but I sat on the University Court, and there was a big discussion at that time about not so much about access, but about retention and attrition, and I just wondered if you could offer some comments about what mechanisms, if any, you employ to keep students in post once we've got them there, particularly if they're affected by disability, so that, everybody, every university has people who drop out, and that's just part of university life. But what efforts do you make to retain those students, particularly those with more complex needs?
Yes, I mean, retention is a keen topic amongst all universities. There's a lot of involvement and effort goes on to ensure that the student arrives and registers, and you want that experience to be a very positive one for the students. We're certainly have quite an initiative and drive within the university from our university principal across all of our schools in the university to look at retention. There is no one particular aspect of relating to students that links or is the cause of not being able to keep students at the university. And we are looking very much at bringing together lots of different aspects of the university, looking to what is given to students before they arrive and register at the university. Because yes, we give lots of information. We have websites, we have prospectuses, and they will come along to visit days and applicant days. But it's very much, it's a different landscape university. We speak a different language, the terminology we use and what students have to navigate. So we're looking at lots of different initiatives. I can't give specifics, but I'm aware the university is looking at lots of different initiatives to ensure that students feel that they're able to stay with their studies, and also to ensure that if they have queries and questions, issues, problems, that they have the relevant signposts to ensure that they can access those services. So it's about giving multiple pieces of information at multiple points, and not just a single, well, this is your handbook and you can find all the answers available. We have developed a personal tutor scheme, which has moved away from what you might have experienced was the advisor of study scheme. And that's very much linked as a designated academic member of staff who is there for that particular student, not simply from an academic perspective, but is there to support the student in any aspect of university life. So.
Thank you. A named person, almost.
Yeah.
No, just kidding. Sorry. Did you want?
Yeah, just to say, to follow on from what Carol was saying, I think for us, early intervention is key. We track students' absences, and if a student has more than a certain number of absences, then they are asked to come along for what's called an investigatory meeting, just to see if there are things that are not going well, if more support needs to be put in place, if the support that's been provided isn't working. We also, the learning agreements that I described earlier, I contact all students with disabilities who have a learning agreement in January to ask if those are working well, if they would like to review the learning agreement and the support. And then in February we have Progress Committee, which I sit on, where all students, the progress of all students through their course is looked at, and any student who is not doing well, again, if they have a learning agreement, that's checked, that's noted. The student will then be contacted and invited to a review of the learning agreement and support. And then at the end of the year, we have our special circumstances board, which happens just before the exam board. And again, all students with disabilities are looked at, and any student who is not doing well, again, the learning agreement and support is checked, and any issues are noted. So we do, and because the numbers are small, obviously I realise that this is perhaps a luxury that we have, but we are able to personally sort of track every student.
Thank you. My second question is speaks to the student experience. We were reminded last week very eloquently that that actually, lectures only fulfill, in my case, if you're an arts graduate, sometimes only 9 hours a week are devoted to lectures. And whilst the university may be very good at providing adaptations, interpreters, if it's a BSL situation, or any other kind of mitigating support to students with disabilities, that those 9 hours really are actually very much a small part of that student experience. And when they talk about the sort of wider university life, including societies and club nights and the range and myriad of opportunities and experiences for students to have, that it's at that point which many students are left out. And in fact, the reflection was quite stark from the panel last week that Scotland doesn't have an institution within it that really ticks all those boxes. There are institutions in the rest of the UK which manage to bridge that gap, but actually it's in that wider student experience element that we are potentially failing. And I just wondered if the panel could give us their reflections on that view.
Kirsty, do you want to come in at this point?
Sure.
Just admissions and having a university that's spread across a few different campuses with different types of accommodation as well?
Yeah, thank you. We certainly do have a number of challenges, given that we've now got kind of 5 campus locations and obviously 4 based in Scotland. And we try and make sure, and we do endeavour at the moment to make sure the approach is as consistent as possible. What we've certainly had in the last few years is invested a huge amount into the structure within the schools and support for students, not just students with disabilities. We did a pilot a few years ago. We had a school enhancement developer for students. So we felt as though the touching points for students were quite minimal, and to have an engagement point throughout the academic cycle in terms of attending classes, assessment, workshops, etc. And that pilot was very successful. Now we have a student enhancement developer within every single school. And within each school we also have an education guidance advisor, and they all work very closely together, that for any students that need to have guidance and counselling, there is a member of staff available. If a student that's got a disability, they have a named disability advisors, and we try to make sure there's a sort of a triangulation of everyone joining together with things. I'm not saying we're perfect at doing it, but that is the approach we are striving towards. We've also introduced, in terms of the university, kind of the ultimate student experience that all universities try to strive towards. We've introduced a Students Welcome Festival, and we run that at each campus. And it's very much, the senior members of staff are very much present at it, and we try and have every single aspect from student services. We have funding available, we have a disability team available, student association, everyone is there, and it's our societies, it's our clubs, to promote to every single student that there's so much more than just the academic side of things. Within, recently we've had a brand new Air campus development, so in terms of accessibility, that's second to none. Paisley campus, we've gone through a massive amount of development with our new principal coming into post, and very much we have a student hub that's in the ground floor. It's right next to funding advisor, disability services, so very much focusing on the student experience. It's the heart of the centre of the university, and that is replicated at Dumfries campus, also at Air campus, and obviously now we are looking forward to the Lanarkshire campus, which 2018, we're striving towards that, and again that'll have the same approach. So we certainly have invested a huge amount in the last few years in focusing on the university experience for all of our students, putting the student at the heart of everything that we do. We're recently taking on the International Student Barometer for all of our students, and that'll be the first year we'll go into that. And we do the student satisfaction survey, so we always analyse our information that we get from that. But from an admissions application perspective, I do liaise with our disability team, and I certainly find that we contact our students or our potential students at the point they have a confirmation decision. And we've certainly found, similar to Carol, is that a lot of the students don't believe they have a disability if they have dyslexia. They don't declare it, they don't disclose it. So we find at induction and enrolment, they come up to talk to the team, and the support is put into place, and again they're given a named contact from that. But what we certainly find is that it's making it ourselves known at that point. And sometimes the students don't want to be identified, same as care leavers, they don't want the stigma of being identified. For anyone that does go forward to disability advisors, we then have a 6-month review with them to sort of find, is there anything else we need to put into place? And it's having that continual review. But from a UWS perspective, we certainly have reviewed everything from the start to the end. And there's so much more we can still bring into place, but we're moving very much in the right direction. And it's a positive thing for UWS.
On the back of Alex's question about the whole university experience, we had some evidence last week, we've had it in written evidence as well, from BSL users who can't access the Freshers' Week or the festivals or things like that because there's not an interpretation service available for them at that point. And therefore, when they get into class, they've all bonded and they feel left out. So that was a very, very clear element of the oral evidence we had last week and some written evidence. Is there any work being done to ensure that that very first stage of making friends, of building relationships, and he was told in the first class, pair off, and everybody paired off and he was left on his own?
Yeah, we certainly have a kind of a one-on, one-off process policy for, say, a deaf student that has to have an interpreter, and so that they always have someone with them. We endeavour to work towards that. What the disability team have noticed is that, or identified to me, is that there's a lack of interpreters. There's a shortage, and the team lead is actually going through sign language training herself, but she's doing that independently of the university, so it's quite interesting, the discussion about training and development. I also asked how many members of staff within the university, within student services, had a disability, and we have one member of staff just now that is blind, but we don't have any deaf members of staff. But yes, we try to make sure that the student experience is replicated. I'm not saying it's perfect, but we do try to make sure that there's situations put into place that they are engaging with the rest of the student body.
Yeah, thank you.
I think just if I could come in as a bookend on that, one of the things I was really struck by was that when I asked if there was an example of an institution in the British Isles or further afield which got this right, the one that came back to us was Preston, and part of that was because they reached a critical mass where, because students with hearing loss recognised that it was a good university to go to in terms of wider provision, more and more deaf students sort of gravitated towards Preston, which added to a virtuous cycle of investment in resources for it. So that it almost sort of built itself, as it were.
Definitely. I think, my role's expanded in the last few months to take on all of sort of recruitment admissions and participation. Not all of it, I've got a head of department, but for me, I'm now asking questions in terms of applicant information sessions, open days, what extra support do we need to put into play to highlight the support services that we have for these students that are coming onto the university, and not just the Paisley campus, but every single campus that we have in the university. So it's for me, it's a really exciting time to take things forward at the university.
Okay. I'm going to move on. Mary.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. A lot of what I wanted to ask has already been covered. But can I ask the panel about the application process itself? Because I was quite struck by the submission, and I think it's from Edinburgh University, when you say that you're not aware of any issues that should be drawn to our attention. And then you go on to talk about reasonable adjustments. And I have to say I was quite disturbed by the use of the word permitted. Someone was permitted to submit an application. But can I ask the panel in general, what work has been done to ensure that the application process is easy and accessible to everyone? Is there any equality proofing done? Is there any testing? Is there any checking? That regardless of your disability, you will be able to complete the application so that you're not in a position where you have to ask for help?
I think it'll be fair, Sheila, to let you come back in that one.
Yes, apologies for the use of the word permitted. That's a very good point. Thank you. I think what all institutions continue to grapple with is the fact that under the Equality Act we have an anticipatory duty, which again, it ties into the whole kind of long-term aim of being much more inclusive and mainstreaming as much as possible, although that won't ever take away from the need for certain individual support. I don't want to go into too much detail about the admissions process because I'm not totally familiar with it, other than at Edinburgh, the disability information is not taken into account in terms of whether an offer is made.
That's not really the point I'm trying to get at. What work has been done to ensure that someone is completing the application or the admissions process, that they will be able to complete it, understand it, and won't have any problem with it?
I don't think I'm best placed to answer that from an Edinburgh perspective. Actually, it'd probably be my admissions colleagues who would...
Well, maybe Carol, as an admissions person, would be able to answer that.
Yes, I can try and answer that. I mean, obviously, for students looking to do undergraduate study in the United Kingdom, the application process is not directly to each university that they're interested in. The application process is through UCAS, and UCAS facilitate the delivery of the applications to each of the choices that an applicant has made. Now, they do a lot of user testing. Not just in terms of the accessibility of the application, but also in terms of the terminology that they're using. So down at Cheltenham, where UCAS are based, they bring in testers and users, and they monitor every aspect of their experience as they're going through the application. So when there's hesitation over perhaps terminology, then there's further probing as to why did they not go further forward. Because obviously, again, as I've mentioned, there's a lot of terminology used that is commonplace in universities and the application procedure, which is not necessarily understood by those that are looking to go and have that experience. Not everybody would appreciate what undergraduate means or what postgraduate means. UCAS have developed their services over many years. They've moved away from a paper submission, and by and large everything is online. They are further enhancing their products, moving to more of a digital process, and they are engaging as wide as possible with their different stakeholders. So obviously applicants are key to their business, as are schools and colleges, as are advisors, as are universities and colleges. So as they're developing their services, at the moment they have finished developing services for postgraduate study, and they are currently developing services in terms of being able to find out about information about universities and what the course involves and everything, but also their undergraduate application services. So that involves engaging with the wider groups and getting feedback. So they're building and listening, taking feedback, adjusting, modifying. So it's not a case of, we've developed a product, we think it's great, please use it. It's very much engaging with those that are going to be using it, both at the front end and at the back end, to try and ensure that it's doing its job. Okay, that's very reassuring. Does anyone else want to comment?
Add in terms of the engagement that UCAS has with the universities. I am part of the UCAS Undergraduate Advisory Group, and I sit on that committee with the Head of Admissions for Edinburgh, and we then feed into, we have Scottish Universities, what is our group called? Universities Admissions Practitioners Group. Thank you. And so Ian and I then feed back the information to the group to sort of see what the developments are for UCAS. UCAS are also having at the moment, because they're doing so many developments on their products, they have webinars. It's each Wednesday morning, I think every fortnight, and we can all participate, and then we can view the sessions afterwards. So again, as Carol says, it's not just UCAS devising a product and running with it. They do trying to engage with us, and they bring in student testers. So again, as a sector, we're very lucky that we do have very much a voice in how the products are moving forward.
Okay, thanks for that. I've just got one very brief question. And I can't remember if it was either Sheila or Anne spoke about awareness training. And I wonder if you could perhaps give me a bit more information as to how in-depth that awareness training is.
It was myself. Well, we've a range of training initiatives for disability awareness within the university, and they vary from short 2-hour workshops to there is a more in-depth programme called Developing an Inclusive Curriculum, which is an accredited module which academics undertake, and they are certificated at the end of it, and it involves participation. It's 4 half-day sessions, and they have to complete support and course work for that. So it goes into quite a lot of detail on the development of inclusive teaching practice within the university. So it varies from the generic basic to the much more in-depth. And I would say as well, the mental health awareness training as well, it varies from short one-off workshops to more detailed. We've had more training facilitated recently, the Scottish Mental Health First Aid training that's been delivered within the university as well. So there's both kind of light brush and more detailed with more content available. So there's a range.
And does it give information on dealing with physical disabilities? Does it cover every type of disability?
Yes, particularly the disability awareness sessions would be focused very much on the different, looking at our student population and considering the barriers to participation that this student group would face and what we as an institution need to do. As I had mentioned earlier, when there is a particular category of disability, like for example when an academic department is going to have a British Sign Language user, we will work with that academic department. It will be on a more informal basis, but they will have training and development, but it'll be very much specific and focused on that individual student's needs as well. We'll do something very similar with working with students who are blind or visually impaired as well. Like we do have a rolling programme of training workshops, that we deliver kind of 3 or 4 times a year, but then we will do kind of the tailored specific courses, working with individual academic department when that need has been identified by the identification of a new student.
Okay, thanks for that. And do other institutions do the same type of awareness training?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll very much similar to what Anne's outlined at Edinburgh. We'll do tailor-made training for individual schools on request, and impairment-specific range of training. We're just about to update our deaf awareness training, as we now have a disability advisor who's a BSL practitioner, so that's going to be a real advantage for us. But yeah, we'll do whatever colleagues would like us to do, basically, but that's within our remit.
Thanks.
Yes, similarly, we have a learning and teaching conference every year, and part of that, it's open to all staff, and part of that conference is given over to disability awareness training. So we had the NUS Scotland mental health officer in this year to give mental health training. We've had Scottish Autism to provide training on ASDs, the RNIB. So it's a rolling programme. Also, if there are any specific requests from departments, then we can organise that as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Thank you very much.
Willie Coffey.
Thanks very much, convener, and hello everybody. Could I go back to this point about students with a disability making application to your institution? And do you think there's a common standard, let's say, that students with a disability can expect? I'm raising this because of the point that Alec Hamilton made about specialist institutions down south somehow attracting students with disabilities, and therefore students with a disability would reject other institutions in the basis for that? Is it like that in Scotland, or is there a common level of service across all the colleges and universities that students could feel comfortable in applying to each and every one of you?
I think that falls to you, Carol.
In terms of a publicised common approach, there probably isn't one as such. However, those working in admissions and admissions practitioners and those responsible for making decisions are very much looking to ensure for all applicants that there's fair practice. So there's a code of practice to ensure that essentially applications that are received and are received on time via UCAS are all treated equally, are all given the same consideration. And I think you'll find most universities, yes, we are working within constraints, but by and large, we are looking to see how can we make an offer of admission to the applicant that we're looking at. And certainly at Aberdeen, our academic admission selectors work very hard to do that. Admissions setups within each university are not the same. So at Aberdeen, we have what we would call centralised admissions, and we have dedicated academic members of staff who are experienced and qualified to be looking at applications across a broad area. So we admit to the degree of MA, the degree of BSc, and whilst the applicant is applying for a particular subject within those areas, we have consistency applied regardless of whether it's anthropology MA or sociology MA. We generally will look to ensure that we can make an offer of admission. So if the candidate is presenting through the Scottish education system, lots of applicants may well have achieved their university qualifications at the end of S5. But obviously under Curriculum for Excellence, we're looking across the S4 to S6 experience. So those who meet what we would present as our minimum entry requirements, you would not be asking any more further qualifications from them. Those that haven't met or haven't quite met, the selectors, and again I think most universities will be the same, are looking to see, well, they're not quite there, can they get there? And if they can't get there, is there an explanation? So disability might be one aspect, but there's lots of other aspects of contextual data. So adjustments may well be made in the offer making. So for example, you know, the disability or the circumstances of the student and their achievements to date may well be quite significant, may well not be quite what we're looking for, but in their application, their achievement is quite significant, and that is demonstrating an ability for further success. So adjusted offer making may well go on after that, you know, to take account for the information that it is presented. Generally, we'll use the information in the application to allow us to make that decision. So we are reliant on the personal statement, and we're also reliant on the information that's provided in the reference. And you'll find that universities will possibly have different approaches as to how they use that information.
Look, thanks for that. I wonder, before anybody else answers that, could I just clarify what I really mean by this? Supposing I'm a student with a disability applying or thinking about applying to U5, right? How do I get an impression about the support that you each offer me before I even begin the journey of trying? I mean, all these support services are great, but it's kind of after the event, isn't it? It's about making the choice to either go to one of your institutions because for me it seems the best one and there's a great level of support. How do you offer that at the outset to students with disability?
One thing, I was involved in a meeting yesterday with our transition advisors, and they work with our college partners on the move for HNC and HND students coming into the university. And what we're going to arrange, I think, for May next year is having a college awareness session. We have a student recruitment team that engage with secondary schools and go out and do school talks, but it's more the provision of our academic portfolio. So again, I will be looking at the extra side of things as well. But in terms of the transition day we're going to have for May, it will have, because the college advisors want to know about our admissions processes, how we look at the applications, they want to know what's available on campus. So again, it will be student services with funding with disabilities. And by having those sessions, we're then going to be having that kind of May, and then we're going to have college sessions for students. We're looking for October. We recently had a set of them last month, but we felt they were quite late in the calendar, so bring them in for October. So we feel as we're working with the colleges to let them know what services we have available, and we're going to do that next year and look at sort of Paisley and Ayr and invite all our college partners, and then once Lanarkshire's up and running, we'll have things at Lanarkshire as well. But for me, that's a development in the right direction. But my opinion is that there's not a lot of integration between the schools, colleges and universities, because if a student's at a college just now and has their support in place, the expectation might well automatically be at the university when I turn up in day one, and I don't think there's a free flow of information that passes forward, and I think that would need to be looked at. And the same with the DSA, in terms of the funding aspects, it is quite sometimes late for students to get their funding. So I feel as though, yes, we can engage with it, have information and guidance, look at the websites, but I think it's getting out there and speaking and raising the profile of what provision available is for the students.
Is that generally the position of the others, would you say?
Certainly at Edinburgh, the Student Disability Service is always open for open days when students and their families come to see the university as part, I guess, of their decision of whether or not to apply. And that would be either people coming to the service and having a chat with one of our advisors, or actually having information stands and so on and so forth at various points throughout the university. Yeah, I think it's, in addition, some of the points that Kirsty made, you know, it's our widening access people do a lot of work with schools, and there's just the usual kind of information on websites, leaflets, email inquiries. Our Students' Association, I think there'd probably be a lot of discussion these days on social media about choice of universities. Not being a user of such, I couldn't say with any degree of certainty, but I think that would be where a lot of information, or certainly anecdotally, that'd be where a lot of information for students is kind of bandied about, if you like.
Carol?
Yes, certainly we are very much aware that, you know, students that are looking to have a university experience are not engaging in gathering information in their final years of school. You know, the information search goes on much earlier than that. And we've certainly at Aberdeen, we've invested very recently in trying to make the information we have on our website more accessible and enable those visiting our website to have multiple ways of communicating and engaging with us, so that we'll have real live chats. We're kind of available to talk to potential students, asking inquiries. We're trying to manage and navigate their journey well before that they're applicants, and ensure that they have a mechanism to find out the detailed information that they might require. So like the other universities, we are keen to ensure that when students visit us on campus, whether that's an individual personalised visit or through open days, applicant days, or articulation arrangements with progression from college, that our full range of services are made available to our visitors, so that they can access them whilst they visit our campus, or they can make appointments to access them when they come and visit. But the choice is theirs.
Okay. Have time for one more question?
Quickly, yeah.
It's about personal statements, and some of your submissions refer to these. I suppose this question is a general question and not specifically about disability. Do each of your institutions use personal statements in the admissions process? And how can students and their families be sure that that's being objectively treated? And is it accountable, and how is it scrutinised so that we know that it's a fair system that you're applying?
Carol?
Yes, at the University of Aberdeen we are reading the personal statement and we are reading the reference. It's really the only opportunity that an applicant has to tell us their story, and they may not use other aspects of the application to give information. They may use the personal statement instead of answering other questions. And so if you don't pick up the information that has been presented there, then you're failing in your responsibilities to give equal consideration to all of the applications that you've received. The personal statement, we are aware, is something that causes quite a lot of anxiety amongst all applicants. Because they are aware that universities will use them in different ways. And most universities will have statements either on their web pages, in their prospectus, and also on UCAS that will explain how those personal statements are used. We do a lot of outreach activity, working with schools, particular schools through our widening access as well, to explain the kind of things that we're looking for in the personal statement. And you will not find that all the universities in Scotland are asking for identical personal statements. So yes, we are looking for an indication of an interest in the subject that a student is applying for, but they do have 5 choices in their application, and therefore the personal statement might not fit all of their choices. And again, there's been wider consultation with UCAS to see, well, how can we improve that experience for applicants so that throughout their journey, if they're not holding any offers for whatever reason, can a new personal statement be submitted that better fits the choices that they're making later in the application cycle. So we try to give as much as possible, as much as we can, direction on what we are looking at or looking for in the personal statement. And because we have centralised admissions and because we have dedicated members of staff who've been working in admissions for a considerable amount of time and undergo training on a regular basis, we have a small group that are looking at each of the applications, so that we're hoping that there is commonality allocated across all of the applications that are received.
At the end of the day, they're pretty subjective, really, in terms of how they're treated. I mean, what I'm worried about and concerned about is how can students who perhaps don't get accepted to one of your institutions and someone who perhaps does with exactly the same qualifications, how do we know that there's fairness being applied there?
Well, if they have the same qualifications, it's unlikely that 2 different decisions will be made.
Oh, right. That's interesting. So, but you can't, I mean, there's a limited number of places.
Yes, and there may well be other factors that will be taken into account to assess that application. So, yes, you have commonality amongst the profile of qualifications, for example, for students that are applying for programmes like medicine, but there are other factors in the admissions process that are taken into account, not just the personal statement and not just the reference. So there's other factors taken into account, such as the interview process, that helps to present the full picture with regards to that with the applicants.
Can I just press on that? In responding to a student who has perhaps been turned down for something like medicine, it's simply a letter back saying, sorry, you didn't get in. There's no detailed explanation of here's how we looked at your personal statement, here's what we scored and positive and so on. It's simply a letter that comes back saying, sorry.
Well, it wouldn't be it at the University of Aberdeen because
right, so there's a different.
Yes, because they will get applications to medicine, if they're not being brought forward for an interview, they are given feedback on why they are not being brought forward for interview. There will be a specific explanation that is particular to that applicant, and that will be detailed to them in the decision that is communicated to UCAS. Those who are invited for interview and are not made an offer after the interview also receive feedback as to why they were not made an offer of admission. Okay, it doesn't mean that they're not qualified, but as you'll be aware, medicine is a controlled subject area and we have a limited number of places. It'd be interesting
to pursue that another opportunity.
Absolutely. We're just about over our time. Annie, I don't know if you want to get in with a quick
Just a very quick one on the back of Willie's. Willie was saying about the sort of personal statements, and you were saying it's written submissions. Do you do other submissions as well, like BSL submissions and video submissions? The way that the Royal Conservatoire were saying that you would look at various different aspects to sit exams, you would take recordings and videos. Would that be something that we do for personal statements for someone who maybe doesn't write in English as a first language if they're a BSL user? Is that something that is common amongst personal statements?
At UWS, we certainly had instances of applicants contacting us to see could they put an alternative format in, and we would engage with the school. And in my experience, I've not had a school saying, no, it's not possible. We obviously have interviews and auditions for quite our creative programmes, and there's film reels, so they do have access to provide alternatives. But it's not been mainstream as such, but we do have an experience of a few people coming forward.
And do we think it should be something that we should be saying during an interview, that because we're obviously trying to get people to declare disabilities at the application stage. So if they're declaring a disability at the application stage, should we be saying, if this is something you're declaring, please, there's other ways for you to do your personal statement? Because I think that would maybe make people feel maybe more likely to apply for courses rather than having to write something down, especially if it is sort of a dyslexia or something like that. They could be very articulate at speaking, and it may make their application more successful, make them feel a bit more confident in putting the application forward.
It's a really interesting point, absolutely, and I think something we can take back to UCAS, and obviously we all have our own online application systems as well, and it's something we can look at for our own institutions too.
One particular issue on that aspect that had arisen last week from a BSL user who was a witness at our inquiry last week, said that if the opportunity to do the application in BSL was available, but also the issue about what's available on your website for people, there's not much on BSL, or it's not signposted very well within the website to be found easily by someone who uses BSL. So again, that's just feedback that we've had that maybe you can consider in your work going forward. We're well over a time for you this morning, and you've been very patient because you've stayed with us for a long time this morning. We're really grateful for your evidence to us this morning. You've given us some very clear points that I think we will be following up as part of the committee inquiry. And if you go away and you think I should have said that, please get back in touch with us, because we're happy to hear from you. So thank you so much for your evidence this morning. Thank you. I'm going to move into private session, so I'm going to suspend committee now. We will be starting back sharp at 11 AM, but we've got a bit of work to do in the private session as well, so thank you so much, and we'll go into